past. Don't really feel like going out to dance or dress up, makeup on, I'd rather chill. Now don't get me wrong, yeah, I love my friends, but tonight I'd rather be at home instead. Cuddle with my poo bear, don't care. Lately I feel a little bit tired, wake up the same routine, I'm expired. Being alone don't feel so lonely. Social anxiety gets so real, so many people can't even deal with the voices inside my head. Don't take it personal, but it's not happening today. I know that I chose this road, but tonight I know I'll be okay. Been running around in circles trying to figure out the details in between of me, myself, and I.
Good afternoon, grasshoppers. It is time for one of the most wonderful games of all time. Now we have basically a good series here. As after all, the series was started by MD Knight Zero by gifting me several books on Bobby Fischer in his interest to form a 1E4 repertoire, and there is no greater player in the world to emulate with 1E4 than Bobby Fischer, even though he struggled against a variety of systems, just like we all do. He did manage to, in the end, conquer most of his opening obstacles and figure out what he wanted to play. For example, in this first game of the candidates quarterfinal match in Denver 1971 on his way to the World Championship. Well, 1 second here. Make sure I go to the right one. Bobby Fischer had numerous problems with both the Caro-Kann and the French defenses. These were semi-open defenses that attacked directly or indirectly, put an assault on the E4 square. Now, invariably, Bobby Fischer usually responded with D4. He did try the King's Indian attack on a number of occasions, mainly against the E6 Sicilians as well. And he also struggled here. I don't think he actually ever played Knight D2. I can't recall that he played Knight to D2. The vast majority of the time, he almost invariably played Knight to C3. And this is a developing move. He never played the advanced variation. The advanced variation gives black an insta-plan, and I kind of agree with him that the advanced variation is somewhat toothless, as the pawn structure automatically favors black to a certain extent as they get to try to undermine the center with c5 directly. And after a move such as knight f6, we can then push our pawn to e5 if we so choose, or we could play bishop to g5, as I think Bobby Fischer may have played as well. I have to do a little bit more research. But unfortunately for this, I helped prepare a candidate for the World Senior Championship once with the McCutcheon defense, which was also played by Vasily Ivanchuk, and it is quite the counter-attacking move. After e5, h6, bishop to d2, bishop takes, b takes, we reach a very similar pawn structure to the Winawer, with the exception that the knight can now travel forward to e4. And there are a few tricks involved here, as white can try to undermine the knight on d4 or go after the g7 pawn directly. And by going after the g7 pawn directly, black actually can play either king f8 or g6. The idea behind king f8, of course, is simply to guard, and black has a threat in this particular position of going into an insta-endgame with queen to g5 check, and in this manner he will get his he will get his rook into play. It is less common, of course, to play that for that similar idea if black plays the move g6 to guard the g7 pawn. And in this particular manner, the most popular move, from what I recall, bishop to d3 also works a little bit better. Therefore, against the move king to f8, it is far more common for white to be perhaps playing the move h4, with the idea of rook to h3 and or rook to g3. Yes. In fact, in the main line of this variation, which we're going to see, we'll discuss castling for black because it has become very popular. Bent Larsen in the first game of the match, which was by far the most interesting game of the match, plays the French defense with the Winawer. The main line, of course, is what Bobby Fischer plays. He experimented with the idea of a3 on the fourth move, as well as early queen to g4 ideas, going after the g7 pawn. But with the main line, Bent Larsen plays knight e7 and c5. And personally, on the seventh move, there are three very popular moves that can lead to either a positional or a tactical advantage. And we will actually fire up our candidate moves in this position. Looking for three moves for white in this particular position. Let's see if I can bring the timer to the top, as it's gotten sandwiched behind a number of things. There are three popular moves. Fischer ideally played two of the more positional features, and the number one move chosen by Stockfish, of course, is the tactical solution, which is what I'm going to discuss for Nico. Good to have you, sir. Welcome, Nico. Now that we've taken a moment to just consider,
Nicodemonius said, VG5C4H4.
1 out of 3 is not bad. In fact, many people believe that h4 is perhaps the best move.
Really clear for me here.
Fischer usually chose either knight f3 or a4, and a4 unfortunately met with a little bit of a demise at some point for him. Let me just see what the comment is on this particular move. They don't really comment on it, as Fischer plays a4 in this particular game. I apologize. But knight f3 had met with a particular demise as being a little bit too slow. In fact, it's the fourth most venomous move after a4, h4, and the most dangerous move for black is queen to g4. Now this leads to a very hectic main line. After queen to c7, queen takes g7, rook to g8, queen takes h7, c takes d4, and white usually tries to batten down the hatches with knight on g to e2, threatening bishop f4 should a queen come to e5. Therefore, black usually plays knight to c6, and white reinforces his pawn. Black prepares castling queenside, and Anatoly Karpov had played a line that was very appealing to me. After queen to d3, d takes c3. The two main line moves here are queen takes c3 or rook to c3. Karpov experimented with the idea of rook to b1, and in fact even experimented with both knight takes c3, which brings about a6 and then rook to b1. And I even had an opponent once play castles in this particular position, which leads to a rather stunning retribution. And I will give you 45 seconds on that as well. 45 seconds to consider what is going on here in this particular position. In the 2 over-the-board games where I reached this position, I managed to win them with the same move. And I pretty much fired them off without my opponent ever having to realize what was going on.
Nicodemus said, QXA6 is fun.
That is correct. Queen takes a6 pretty much puts black on the back foot. I mean, white, according to Stockfish, is nearly up a piece after this particular move. I've run into a variety of answers to this, whether they move their rook, move their king, or move their knight to f5 and try to ignore what's going on. Ideally, all 3 of those moves revolve around the same concept of trying to ignore what's happening. The main problem in this particular position is that knight to b5 is coming. And knight to d6 check could be rather fatal. So black does have to deal with it. Knight to b8 probably being the most reasonable counterattacking move. And king to b8 trying to put the pressure on the queen in a roundabout way almost immediately with the I guess there's no threat, but knight to a5 perhaps to try to batten down the hatches. I'm still tempted by the move knight to b5, but now the pawn can take the queen and we'll be down a piece after knight takes c7 check, king takes c7, so that's no good. So king to b8 indirectly prevents knight to b5 as well by threatening the queen if anything goes to b5. That was considered the main line. Boris Spassky actually preferred queen takes c3 in one game that I recall him playing as white. But in general, the main line of the Winawer commences here. And we have to decide how we're going to go about it. So queen to g4, believe it or not, in its later years, I think in its most recent inception, has been met by castles. And it's not that easy to get anything, as after bishop to h6, knight to f5 drives the bishop back. And knight to g6 also accomplishes the same goal. So while bishop h6 may appear foolhardy, I mean, black is pretty well placed. After all, if we chase the queen will either go to c7 or a5, with counterplay on both of these squares, removing the defender of d4. So, inadvertently, the move castles has often been met by the simple bishop d3. I had this a couple of times early on in my days of e4, and I do believe in e4, by the way, everybody. I believe in e4 as the #1 way to achieve an advantage as white. And it really doesn't matter what black does at this point. White will be setting himself for a variety of initiative-filling ways. And then, now, there isn't any necessarily good pressure on this square just yet, as the move bishop to e7 and the move bishop to f6 are both in the cards. And white will probably just castle after a move like c takes d4. Oh, we do have to worry about the e5 pawn, so f4 will be more likely the standard choice. And after knight to g6, castles, and white is still in the driver's seat. Black has lost a lot of time, and this particular pawn wedge is keeping his pieces from coordinating from kingside to queenside. Moving backwards in this particular game, and getting away from this discussion of...
Nicodemus said, ISNTC4 just winning a bishop here instead of CXD4.
Let's take a look. 1 second. That was in the line with castles. Queen to g4, castles. Let's take a quick peek at that. Bishop to d3, knight on b to c6. You know, it never occurred to me about c4, but I mean, obviously we have bishop takes h7 check, and queen to h4 check. We're picking up the piece back, so it's not really winning a piece. Uh-oh. We're going to have to put this one on pause for just a moment. Eva, I'm in the middle of streaming a YouTube instructional video. What's up?
Said, true thanks.
Yeah, that's what I said. Bye. Testing. Oh, I didn't succeed in muting the, did not succeed in muting the microphone at all. Needless to say, if someone calls twice, it could well be an emergency. So let's look at it on the next move. Is there a way to prepare that? Even after the move knight to g6, though, white can simply castle as there's no threat because a bishop takes g6. And this does lead to a relatively clear advantage for white. In order for black to obtain any form of counterplay, he's going to have to recapture with the pawn away from the center. And white is going to be crashing through, and I don't see any possible means of counterplay on the queen side anymore, and these pieces seem like they could be a little misplaced. It's white who's in the driver's seat. White can try to reach the other side of the board with queen to a4, but rook a2 with a later rook to b2 if needed. After all, we're exchanging these pieces being out of play, the rook on a2 and the queen on a4. Not that great of a difference here, for the most part. Black does have to follow through on his idea and try to take advantage of the weakness, thanks to the pin on the rook. But white just carries through. Getting back to the seventh move, h4 is a very aggressive and dynamic move, and I think that was one of the last moves to be thought to be the refutation. In the Fritz days, before Stockfish came around, this move was very successful, weakening these squares on the king side. Black often played h6 to prevent the forward march of the pawn, and in turn that created its own weaknesses. But we can keep all of those things in mind if those things suit you. I tend to prefer, and still do prefer, queen to g4, while Fischer actually played a4 in this particular position, and the natural move, knight on b to c6, returning to our positional approach to this opening. And here, Larsen probably should drive the bishop back straight away with c4. That would be the main line. Queen to a5 is also very popular, but Larsen played queen to c7, which is, give or take, an indirect attack on the c3 square. Whether or not we get anything on these squares is another choice, because we're going to be recapturing any knight on d4. So c takes d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and queen to c3 check. Kind of disperses almost everything in the white position, so it's the simplest in this position just to castle. Now queen to c3 is not coming with check, and the knight on d4 can be guarded. So Larsen chooses c4 here. Bishop e2. Now, this position had a bit of distaste for me when I was looking at it, even though it works out well and white is still in the driver's seat. So therefore I depended upon Alekhine's approaches as white against the Winawer with either bishop d2 or knight on g to e2 on the fourth move. And those moves served me very well against any average player, but I've never had to play a grandmaster against the Winawer. And in fact, very few grandmasters do play the Winawer. Now, f6, of course, is what Larsen plays, so Fischer decides to vary from a previous game, wanting to be the first one to create a novelty. Bishop a3 is more to the point. And Fischer had previously played that particular move, and in this particular position chose rook to e1. After knight to g6, of course, black should be castling queenside and starting to create his counterplay much faster than this. Fischer returns to bishop a3, and black begins to break down at the centers by grabbing the pawn. Knight on g to e5, of course, may lead to a transposition to what occurred in the game. Fischer's going to put pressure not just on the knight, but also on the g7 pawn. Larsen played knight on c takes e5, reaching the same position, and then chose to retreat his knight. And of course, he's going to answer queen takes g7 with castling queenside. But we are not going to capture pawns that are directly in front of our own king. We're just not going to do that. So for the most part, Nico, I did resolve to myself to give everyone a chance to find Fischer's 17th move in this particular position. So we'll look for several candidate moves in this position which might further our attack. And there are indeed 3 moves to further our clear advantage. One being better than the other 2 for a potentially greater than clear advantage. Trying a new playlist. Hopefully we won't get any copyright strikes on this one. If we do, I will have to redo this video, but it's just as well as I got a call from the boss in the middle of it.
Said bh5 rab 1 bc5.
Now the only drawback here is that with the move rook on a to b1, Nico, we just have to concern ourselves with the a4 pawn. Therefore, a5 is one of the top 3 moves in the position, taking care of the problem of the pawn. After all, if the queen were to take, we will have profitable discoveries on many fronts, whether we play bishop to d6, followed by rook takes a7 maybe, or bishop to c5, or if we just try to ignore what's going on and see if black is willing to castle into this attack. After all, now we're winning material. Or at least we're attempting to win material. There will be options after rook on h to g8, queen to g2, queen to b6, and white's up the exchange again. I'm fairly certain that this is okay for, very okay for white, if not winning, because of black king being stuck with an onslaught on the queen side. So a5 is one of the 3 moves. You were correct, though. Bishop h5 was the move. Did you also choose h4? The theme here, of course, is that h4, h5 are always going to be a bother in this position. Queen e5, of course, is the move that we might be concerning ourselves with, and following through on our ideas is key. We could also maybe threaten mate, among other things, with queen to c5 and queen to b4 on b6. Got a number of threats in this position. Quite a number of threats, depending on whether or not the queen moves or doesn't move. Let's say if black's queen tries for any form of counterattack, we can actually ship the attack onto the king side in this manner. Bishop takes g6, and queen takes f8 being the main threat. Bishop takes g6 is check, so queen takes f8 check is the main threat. So needless to say, Fischer chose the strongest move in the position, unveiling the rook's potential on the e-file, driving, or at least forcing black to commit himself, Castles is the safest move for black, and white's advantage is still evident. We're going to continue, as we just discussed, with a5 in that case. But since we're going through the book Unstoppable American, as gifted to us by MD Knight Zero, we're going to stick to the script. And with the knight firmly pinned, Fischer puts even more pressure on the king by preparing to crack open the e-file. There is a threat, of course, of rook to e7 looming. So something has to cover it. And he does choose perhaps the wrong rook to the e-file. Rook on a to e8 could be better, but I think he's interested in castling by hand. Fischer follows through with f5, and after e takes f5, queen takes d5 check. The king, well, he's a little bit in the lurch. And here, Fischer does not necessarily play the best move. He has a choice of several moves, and unfortunately he lets his advantage slip nearly completely in this particular position. So we're going to give everyone a chance to look for a move that will improve upon Fischer. And I'm stalling for a moment before I start the timer, just to give everyone a little bit more of a chance. While I also check the comments to make certain that this is covered. Yes, Fischer chooses a move that loses the entire advantage in one blow. Subscriptions on YouTube, now is the time. You hit the bell on YouTube as well, by the way.
32RF1BXG6.
And that is the #1 way to contribute. If you're not a subscriber on Twitch, you will be able to submit comments on the YouTube channel as you watch. I can read those and they will be read. Rook e2, bishop f1, and bishop takes g6. Now, ideally, rook f1 is better than the move that he played. Absolutely better than the move that he played. Queen to d4 check is better than the move that he played, along with h4. I don't know that we need to take that knight just yet. Fischer chose to move bishop to f3, which is unfortunate. I'm not entirely sure what he intended to get out of this, but he had the crushing blow bishop to d6, which really creates a problem because black's best move more than likely is queen to c8, which is rather passive, but queen to b6, queen to c5, h4 is going to lead to all sorts of trouble, as we still have the option of playing bishop to d4 check. It's going to be very tough for him to answer this without losing material. Perhaps he has to barnacle and try to hold off anything with rook to e6, where bishop to d4 check. The king can actually try to migrate back toward the king side. And amazingly enough, queen takes f5 attempts to surround him, with both threats of bishop takes g6 and on rook takes e1 check. Of course, it's met by rook takes e1 check, and all of the attackers are here.
Why is qc6 bad for black in this line?
Oh, 1e4, how are you, man? Why is queen to c6 bad for black? Let's take a quick peek. Assuming that you mean here. After all, we are going to retreat. I think then Fischer's idea must be correct. And this is one of those things why queen to c8 in the first place should have been played. But in general, it looks as though bishop f3 is going to be embarrassing the queen in a number of variations, especially after queen to d4 check. But it is important to note that after queen to b6 check, where were we? Black is somewhat obligated to defending the d7 bishop.
Said, okay, I am class D, of course I didn't see that.
No, I disagree with you. You're not class D. You are not class D. I really need you to understand that you are not a rating. It's very tempting in this position also to play the move bishop to d4 check and to lure the king out to g5. But then we might lose time trying to defend our bishop. So h4 is the great preparatory move to actually threaten what's going on. Rook e5, of course, loses the exchange.
My rating is 1378. I am what my rating says I am. Nicodemonius said, Paul 1e4 are their classes in chess now lol.
Yes, the class system, let's go back to the original move that was played by Fischer. Bishop f3. The original class system, for me, I think class E was under 1,000. Or maybe class F is under 1,000 because I believe above 1,200. I guess class
is just a US thing.
Yeah, Paul 1e4 and I are showing our age if we know the class system, basically. D, C player,
said, class E is
1400.
1,011.99.
I believe Class A was 1,800 to 2,000, which would mean that Class B was 1,600 to 1,800, and Class D is obviously correct for Paul 1e4. It's going to be from 1,200 to 1,400. So Class E, I started off as a Class E player. I rose above that as quickly as I could. Yeah, Class E, very good. Yep. He caught up with me on my math. And there was a famous book called How to Be a Candidate Master. Candidate Master was 2,000 to 2,200. And that was written by FIDE Master, I believe. Correspondence Grandmaster Alex Dunn in his correspondence chess. And many players laughed at it that it would be the move. Of course, everything that he was suggesting lowered everyone's rating. Like if you were a master and you studied this book, you would be a candidate master. But it was indeed a good book. How to Be a Candidate Master did try to cover a lot of things, and it did appeal to a certain population. Queen to d4, of course, keeps the knight from moving, and this was part of our plan all along. So there begins the dance where we attempt to simplify this position, and white gets 2 pieces for a rook. But black does get a bit of a threatening position, and in fact even gets the threatened checkmate. There's probably only one real way to defend against this. So we're going for candidate moves for white again in this position. Obviously, there's only one move. Otherwise, we are getting checkmated. I'm positive that this is what Larsen saw from a distance, and he didn't see how it could possibly go wrong.
Nicodemonius said, QC6.
Indeed, and it is behind the move of Queen C6 that we have to play. The next key move as we walk the tightrope toward equality. want to lose any material here.
Dear mother, it's me, your first daughter. Instead of writing a letter.
Now it appears that there are a couple of correct moves in this position.
Nicodemonius said, "Can't we just go for BC5?
You're beautiful in every way. Dear mother,
Indeed, but there's one other move that does come up a little bit short. Why doesn't Queen to C5 work?
I don't know how you do it. Being a mom of 3 kids is amazing. You're so amazing. It's so incredible the things you do for me. It's so incredible you inspire me.
Paul E. said, BC5 is my thought, so can be good."
Well, the problem with Queen to C5 is that Black still has the move that he plays in the game. Rook to F2 check, and the king has to walk into a discovered check, which loses a piece, and we'd be down the exchange after the recapture. So therefore, as it turns out, Bishop C5 is the only move as he continues his trek toward equality. Rook to F2 check. And both players appear to be walking a tightrope in this particular position. As Jan Timman points out, this is the position that appealed to me the most. Giving up the queen, in fact, and the imbalances that resulted from it were always very cool. So in this particular position, it was worth looking at rook to G1 check, and then bishop takes, because we also have the options of trying to go after the king in a variety of other ways. Rook to G1 check is a perfectly acceptable move as well, as it transposes. However, in the previous position, I wonder if the king didn't need to go to F7, because the bishop was already on F3. And now, Black is still equal, but he's walking a very thin line to try to stop what's going on. Perhaps moving his king toward the queen side to assist in the... Note how the queen is guarding. The G7 pawn. But unfortunately, Larsen chose G5 rather than trying to migrate his king toward the king side. And now the bishops are poised to escort that pawn through. Queen takes C2. I mean, after all, what are we going to do? A5, queen to B2, this attempt to stymie the pawn from moving any further. Now Fischer plays the second best move in this particular position as well. Or does he? Yeah, he does play the second best move. He should, since he doesn't have D4 square available to him, play bishop to G5, I'm sorry, bishop to E3. With a double attack on the G5 pawn and trying to get this pawn moving.
In chess, I think we should borrow from D&D so I can proclaim myself as a chess warlock, reckless, squishy, but often with some pretty spectacle, even if it's not that good.
I think you're revealing your age a little bit there with Dungeons and Dragons, yeah? I missed my Dungeons and Dragons days. It is true that after F4, this pawn is just going to fly, fly, fly. There's no time to take or hold back that pawn. There's just no time to capture it because the pawn is too fast. And we're left as a spectator here as the white squared bishop is Fischer after queen to B2 chose bishop to D8 check. It looks like it does almost the same thing. The king migrates toward the queen side, but we're not at all interested in these pawns as we need to get our pawns moving. And Larsen has to choose from a variety of evils here. He chooses somewhat the wrong one. If he really wants to stop that pawn from moving forward, he had to choose Queen F2. Instead, he chose the popular aphorism of getting behind the passed pawn with Queen A3. And the next most logical move candidate moves for white. Where did the time go? I was planning on doing 3 of these before the hourly bullet arena. Now, of course, there are 2 moves that win. Fischer played one of them. Stockfish is very, very critical, as both of these moves are actually equal in value. I'm going to have to remove the question mark from the next move.
Nicodemonius said, BB7, BB5, Don TC any third move.
Oh, that's good. That's very, very good, because Stockfish believes that rook to E1 check, keeping the king from moving to D6 because of bishop to E7 check, is the best move. And that will be very, very bad for white, obviously. The king will be forced away, and this in-between move will hopefully prevent any counterplay. So as it turns out, the move Queen A3 lends itself to this possibility. So Queen A2 leads to a similar demise. After all, there's no way of stopping the pawn from moving forward. I think that he had planned on playing Queen to C5 by going to A3. But you're right, Nico. Bishop to B7 is easily also the best move. Let me see if I can find that question mark so I can remove it from that move. There we go. Sorry for that quick shift in the screen, but Stockfish actually analyzed it. Now this is, of course, his idea. And we already know what's going to happen after this. I mean, white can play almost anything he wishes to force that pawn through. White can play rook to A1. White could play rook to E1 check with the same idea. There's one additional factor with rook to E1 check. The fact that the king can't move to D6 because of the skewer. Also key. But after king takes F7, there's no stopping bishop to E3. Whoops. Pushing the pawn through. This bishop is covering every bit of counterplay on the long diagonal. And I think he made quite the statement with this particular setup. So after queen to C5, Fischer actually chose rook to B1 with the even more simple idea, just play bishop to B6.
Said, RB1 seems okay also no.
Yep. Absolutely. Rook to B1 is the move that he chose, and Fischer was noted for his simplicity.
Said, oh great.
Although, you know, it does seem like there could be some chances for counterplay, but we always have the in-between move, and that's probably what Fischer saw to force resignation in this position. We will be back in just a few moments with the bullet arena that has been added to the calendar at 6 o'clock on Saturdays. Hopefully every Saturday at 6 o'clock. I'll be adding a bullet stream. We're going to do the 10 p.m. Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, under 2,000 bullet streams until I get my rating over 2,000. But heading over, of course, Let me just end the stream here for just a moment, and we will continue this stream in just a few moments with taking off the subscribers only chat, and we will be going into under 2,000 bullet arena moments.
Said, bye Master Chess Dojo.
Well, I hope you stick around for the bullet. This is rather embarrassing, but I am going to get my rating over 2,000, and then I won't be able to play in the under 2,000 bullet arena. But I think it reflects poorly and well at the same time on what I need to work on in my games, because my instincts are going to be very, very exposed. Thank you everyone for being here.